Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Hive Live. I'm your host, Alex Netty, and good news, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Hopefully, you've been following all of our approachable content on social media, but if you haven't, you can find us on all the major channels under @Hive Systems, HIVESYSTEMS. So make sure to give us a follow to stay up to date on the latest content that we've been sharing this month to keep you safe. Well, along that vein, today we're going to be talking about a cybersecurity topic that's going to impact you, your organization, or even your family. It's social engineering. You may have heard of things like the shell game or Ponzi schemes or even rainmaking, which are all classic examples of one thing: a con. In the digital era, these scams have been expanded through the power of the internet to become things like phishing, vishing, smishing, and impersonating. And you could be the next target. So, even worse, on the right day with the right lure, anyone can be a victim of social engineering, even cybersecurity professionals like ourselves. So, what can you do? Well, let's get right into it. There's a number of ways that we can really look at social engineering, but one of the best ways is to start with a view into what it looks like. What does it feel like? How does it actually leveraged and used? So, we'll start that off here with a quick cybersecurity vignette. So we're going to call this vignette the activist heist. The idea here is that you're the leader of a vigilante activist group. For those of you who have been fans of Mr. Robot, when that was on TV, the main protagonist corporation was called Evil Corp in the show. So we've used it here as an example. In this case, there's a company that maybe you want to steal data from. That way you can expose that they're actually bad for society. So you want to get that data out of the company. But the best way, of course, here in 2021, a lot of stuff is digital. And so you need to steal those electronic records. That way you can show all of the bad deeds that Evil Corp has done. So you and your team are sitting down and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to steal the information. And so you start to hatch a plan. So far, you've come up with two different options. The first is Stacy's plan. Stacy is recommending some deep electronic reconnaissance. So, looking at where there are vulnerabilities on the exterior of the company, looking around to see where information is or isn't, or maybe how you could exfiltrate it. You might use hacking tools like Kali Linux and Metasploit. That way, you could take advantage of any misconfigurations. It's going to take a lot of legwork and information in that, again, that electronic reconnaissance to try to see what's going on. Once you can get in, though, and you find that opportunity to get in electronically, you can move laterally across the network and try to search for those crown jewels, that key information you're looking for to bring down Evil Corp. Well, you'll take all that information and you'll exfiltrate it, meaning pulling it out of the company slowly so you don't get detected. And the best part is, of course, you can do all of this remotely. So, right now, with a lot of people working remote, this might be a great opportunity. So, Stacy's plan is looking pretty good. Alternatively, we've got Thomas's plan. Thomas, though, is recommending that you scout out the corporate headquarters for a few weeks. Maybe find out when the least number of people will be there so you can hang out in the car outside in the van and watch people come and go. And maybe at night you break into the building through windows or lockpick doors. Then you try to avoid all the physical intrusion detection devices, like this famous scene here on the right from Ocean's 12 as you dance around past all the lasers. And you want to break into key people's offices and steal the data from laptops, anything that's on desks. So anyone who's maybe left a password on a sticky note or left their computer unlocked, you can get in and take all that information. Of course, the key piece, though, is it all needs to be done in person at the headquarters. So whose plan do you choose? Well, there's a couple options here. Obviously, you've got two of them, but what if there's another way? What if instead you pitch your plan, where you just walk in the front door like you own the place? Or you send an email pretending to be the CEO and ask for any of the info that you're looking for, or just call someone and pretend to be the help desk. All those are great opportunities that can actually just get the information without all that legwork that was coming from Stacy and Thomas's plan. Well, all of those things that we just talked about from your plan have one thing in common. It is social engineering. So, what is social engineering? Well, the best way, of course, to define it is always to start with a good dictionary definition. In this case, social engineering, a noun, and in the context of information security, is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. From there, obviously, there's a couple things that we can look at. It's the main types of social engineering. Some of these you may have heard of, some of them you may not have heard of, some of them you may have experienced, but just not known what the name was. Well, the most popular of all types of social engineering is phishing. And that is social engineering that comes via email. We will talk about this because it is the number one way that cyber attacks start right now. And so, this is one of the most critical ways that we can interrupt the cycle of social engineering. So, we'll dive into depth on that a little bit more here shortly. The second is smishing. This is social engineering via text message. You may have received alerts saying you need to pay your bill via text message, or to click on a link in a text message, or maybe even a car warranty repair. Any of those may come through via text. That is smishing. Vishing is social engineering via phone call. This is a specific category of calls that come in. Some of them you may think of like the IRS calling or something to repair your car warranty. Those are generally kind of in the vein of smishing in that they are trying to solicit money and information out of you, but generally they're not quite as targeted. Those are kind of more broad schemes. So the idea with vishing is that it's something that's a little bit more targeted, maybe directly directed at you versus just spam calls. Finally, the lowest form, or rather the least likely form of social engineering is impersonating. And this is when somebody impersonates somebody in person in an attempt to exploit them or maybe gain access to an area that they shouldn't have access to. Well, all of these things have something in common. And while they all have funny names like phishing, smishing, vishing, and impersonating, the main thing they have in common is they are all a con. Historically, we know these when we talked earlier about things like Ponzi schemes or the shell game. You may have known those easily as cons or scams, but here in the digital age, all of these are trying to solicit the same things. They're trying to solicit information from you or money or something along those lines to take advantage of you. So, why is social engineering a focus? Well, the biggest one that we look at when we think about social engineering is it's a low barrier to entry. Uh, if you try to actually maybe hack somebody, like we talked about earlier with Stacy's plan, you'd have to learn how to code. You'd have to educate yourself on how to use hacking tools. You'd have to understand how IT networks work and the OSI stack and everything that goes with that. You'd have to understand how to be able to scan for vulnerabilities and ultimately identify how to exploit those vulnerabilities with things like Kali Linux and Metasploit, like we talked about earlier. You'd also have to find a path to that information that you want. Once you're on the network, you can't just necessarily get to the information. You might have to move around and find it. And especially today, with a lot of companies putting more investments into cybersecurity, you have to avoid being caught. And really, at the end of the day, like I said, circumventing millions of dollars of IT investments, especially for larger companies, can be really hard. The alternative, you could just purchase a phishing as a service kit. Just like many tools that are available online today in like web applications, things like even Salesforce that are online that just with the click of a credit card, you can have access to it. You can do the same thing for phishing kits. That means that someone can enter their credit card, get access to a phishing tool, and start launching a phishing campaign against your company in just 10 minutes. Same goes for smishing. You can blast out text messages very easily just by purchasing a service that somebody's already set up. If we were looking at that vishing example, you could just pick up the phone and call somebody and pretend to be somebody else. That's a very low barrier to entry. Or if you're trying to impersonate, you can just walk in the front door. As we often think about with impersonating, just putting on a yellow vest and holding a clipboard can usually be enough to get into areas that you're not supposed to have access to by pretending to be a maintenance person. So all of those have much lower barrier to entries than that left side, where there's a lot more legwork and maybe years of industry knowledge that you need to go through. That makes a huge up or gives a huge advantage to hackers and scammers who are trying to take advantage of you. So when we look at phishing, which we talked about as one of the biggest areas, 91% of all cyber attacks begin with a phishing email to an unsuspecting victim. That is a huge number. And so when we talked about earlier where you might have to learn all those ways to code and hack, that's a lot of work. And hackers and scammers have taken that same advantage and said, well, hey, I maybe will just use these lower barriers to entry with social engineering and be able to get the same effect at the end of the day, if not be more effective in what I'm trying to do. The biggest thing, though, with phishing, like we talked about earlier with that Oxford definition, is that it tries to collect information. This really goes for all social engineering, but really, when we're thinking about what information phishing and social engineering at large tries to collect, At home, it might be things like your social security number or your bank account number or your child's personal information or even passwords for the accounts that you use. At work, though, it could include things like proprietary information that your company has, could include financial statements, maybe things that aren't publicly available, could include customer personal information. So, all the information that you might collect for the customers and clients that you work with. More importantly, they might be looking for administrator passwords, things that would give them elevated privileges to be able to take advantage of opportunities within the company that a normal person might not have. Once successful, though, hackers and scammers can do all kinds of things, like install ransomware, both at home and at work. As a number of news stories have recently talked about, both through Colonial Pipeline and even meatpacking companies and everybody in between, ransomware has started to cause huge problems. With a successful phishing email, that ransomware can quickly get installed, and that's the biggest way that that's been happening recently. Especially if a password is stolen, whether at home or at work. A hacker or scammer could log into your accounts with those stolen passwords. So they could shut down your Facebook account, or if you had a verified Twitter handle or something like that, they could take over that and steal it and lock you out. They could lock you out of your email or send emails through your email. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They could install things called rats that could record you through your webcam. They could also install keyboard loggers that could watch everything you type, or even do something as innocuous as mine cryptocurrency. All of those things are not things that you want, but of course, for a hacker or scammer, a quick email and you being unsuspecting could cause a lot of issues. So, one of the biggest ways that we try to interrupt that cycle of abuse for hackers and scammers is, what does social engineering look like? Our ability to recognize social engineering is the number one way to stop this. So, the best way we'll really start here from this side is we've got a quick video here that we'll be able to show. And hang on one second while I bring that up. And this really shows how social engineering can work as it's stepped through from a hacker's perspective.
How did you decide to become a hacker?
Well, I'm not really sure what it means to become a hacker. That's like some guy in a hoodie who types really fast and stays up all night writing code and cracking passwords. It's not me. I just spy on people and see what makes them click. It's not a bad job.
Mark Haney, CEO of Qualicard, set to report earnings after their blockbuster IPO. So you consider this a job?
I put a lot of work into this. I'm not lazy. It takes research to figure out the key players, learn all about them, their families, their friends, what they care about. You have to understand the company's organization. I get a lot of my information from the sales department because they're always so quick and eager. They're hungry. People trust too easily. They don't look at the details. I do. Details matter. That's what I'm good at. It has to look completely believable. It has to look familiar. This is where research is important. It's not some generic piece of spam. It's an email from their boss with their company's signature. It's written in the voice of the boss. It's what he would say if he were writing this.
What about the malware itself? How does that work?
Somebody else out there already wrote all the code that does the actual attack. I'm just using it in the attachment. My skill is in my ability to get a bunch of people to click on that attachment. I always wonder what it's like when the whole thing unfolds on their end, when the panic sets in.
Please leave a message after the beep. Hey, this is Rajiv in finance. Call me as soon as you get this. Something's up with my laptop. Katie, are you on your way to the office? Something's going on with our file server.
Karen and HR, our benefits dashboard seems really slow. We're getting calls from users on it. How do we do this?
You'll be calm down.
Apparently, there's a malware attack targeting our
It's
main.
ransomware. They're holding us hostage. We're locked out of everything. I can't even check my phone. What about the backup?
That will take days.
We need this fixed now. Just pay it. We don't have a choice. We're reporting earnings in 2 hours.
But how do we know that they'll?
Pay it. Put every single person on getting us back up and running. That's the only priority now. Okay, it's done. I have the decrypt key. problem. The ransomware was just to distract us. They got inside. They got everything. Customer data, financials, everything.
Qualicards is reeling today from the news that hackers have released the personal information of nearly
The
2
Nasdaq
million
closed lower today, led by Qualicard, which was down 14% on news that their recent data breach may be far worse. The company
Its stock
originally
fell to a new all-time low on news that CEO Mark Hanning is stepping down after what is turning out to be one of the worst breaches of personal information in recent history.
Do you feel bad about releasing the personal information, all the financials, all the money that was lost?
All I did was get the files. I'm not the one that decided to release them. I'm not the one that shorted the stock. Somebody else had their reasons for that. It's above my pay grade. I was paid to do a job, and I did it well. That's what's expected of anyone, isn't it? Anyway, markets bounce back.
All right. So that is a great opportunity to kind of see what does this look like and how do all these pieces fit together from a hacker and scammer's perspective. So what does that mean for you? Well, obviously, there's a couple things we saw in that video. Up first, we really look at how that information is used. We talked about some of those services like phishing as a service and smishing as a service. In the video, she took advantage of those, right? She's not necessarily a hacker by trade and knows all of that code, but she's paid for that information and using it then effectively after doing all of her research. That's the biggest thing is that with hackers and scammers who take advantage of social engineering, they can use all of their research to take advantage of you. So your public profiles that are on LinkedIn or Facebook or any information on websites out there about you can be leveraged to hopefully, in their perspective, get you to click on something and engage. So how do we stop that and recognize it? Well, there's a couple things that we can do. When we think a little bit about really, like I just talked about, who is at risk, well, up first, it's really comes down to if you are a target or not. The hardest part is that when we think about if you're a target, we really look at it and say you're not always a target. Social engineering can usually cast a wide net, and it's a numbers game. So if we think back to the classic social engineering scam of the Nigerian prince, for example, obviously everybody at some point or another has received that email, right? The one that there's a Nigerian prince and he's got money and he wants you to send your bank account information so he can transfer a bunch of money to you. 99.99% of people won't engage with that email. But if that email gets sent out to 20 million people, there is probably one person out there who might actually believe that and respond. And so for some types, you're not always a target. It's just a broad sweeping example of them trying to send information out and get somebody, anybody to engage. But some social engineering is more tailored and it's specifically tailored just for you. Like in that video with all that research, if that tailored information gets sent in an effort to get you to engage, we call that spear phishing, something that's directly targeted at you. So the biggest takeaway and something that you really need to think about from today's presentation is really on the right day with the right lure, anyone can be a victim of social engineering. And that includes cybersecurity and IT people who might think that they're more savvy. There's a great example of a company that I was working with many years ago where we were running a phishing simulation. And in this case, we actually sent out notifications before talking about what the simulation was going to look like. And we let some specific groups and people know. In this case, actually, we notified the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, so someone who should really know cybersecurity. And in this case, the email was actually about a missed delivery notification. One of the hottest forms of phishing available right now are the subjects for phishing emails. And so we sent this email out to the entire company. And on that day, he happened to be at home waiting for a delivery, a laptop that was coming in. And so he was out in the backyard waiting, for the doorbell to ring and for this package to arrive so that he could get back to the office. And he saw that email come in saying missed delivery. And so even though he knew that email was coming out that day, he knew the subject, he knew exactly what it looked like. In his moment of frustration about being at home waiting for this package to arrive, he clicked on that link. And of course, we got a quick call afterwards with him laughing, knowing what had happened because it notified him right away that it was part of this phishing simulation. And he laughed about it. He's like, you got me. I was already frustrated that I was at home. I even knew it was coming. But in that moment, the fact that I saw a missed delivery notification, I'm here at home waiting for this package to arrive, it caught me. And so that's a huge problem. That nuance and that ability to stop and think through what an email is saying and doing and how you can stop this cycle of abuse that hackers and scammers put out there is the number one way to stop this. The biggest thing really to think about is that many email providers, including your company or organization, and even major providers like Gmail, they invest heavily in cybersecurity to try to stop this problem. But you're the last line of defense. Again, even if a company like Gmail or your organization blocks 99.9% of spam emails that come in, considering the number of emails that are sent globally every day, there's still going to be some that come through. And so it's on your ability to recognize these emails and recognize some of the motivators, which we'll talk about in a minute, to be able to stop this. So those motivators are the biggest thing that really come out. What I really love about social engineering is it's almost an art form. We use, or rather, hackers and scammers use these motivators to try to trick you into engaging with that email. Again, whether clicking on a link or doing something else, they want you to engage with the email in some form or fashion. And so what happens is that these motivators end up being kind of the base, right? The special sauce to social engineering. And while the subjects of emails may change or they might adjust them over time, these motivators are always there. And so what's fun is when you get a new type of social engineering event, like a phone call or a text message or even a phishing email coming in, you can actually kind of stop and appreciate how hackers and scammers have maybe leveraged these motivators in a new form or fashion. So the first one up is authority, and this one is extremely popular. A good example here is maybe this is the IRS and you're being investigated for tax fraud. You're likely to respond to this because the IRS has that sense of authority. And so you might be inclined to maybe make sure that your taxes were filed appropriately, or you want to respond to this quickly to understand what's going on and how you can make sure it doesn't happen. If the email purports to be from the IRS and they say, well, we need you to log in with your social security number and your address, that would make sense maybe to verify you since you don't have a username or login for the IRS. But is it really the IRS? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Maybe intimidation, something like I've kidnapped your dog, so pay me some money now, send Bitcoin to this address. You're intimidated by the fact that something is happening and you want to act quickly. There's also consensus. Everyone is volunteering for this cause, so sign up. You don't want to be the only person at maybe your company who hasn't signed up for this event. So you log in and enter all of your information in this web form, and it gets sent out to an event you think you signed up for. But in the meantime, you actually entered your name, your birthday, your address, and maybe a credit card for a t-shirt, and suddenly all that information is gone. There's also scarcity. Click here for your free coupon. Only the first 100 people get it. You want to act quickly because something's going to go away and not be available anymore. Well, that puts you in a position to react maybe quicker than you thought you were going to. The biggest one here really is urgency, something that wants you to act quickly. And oftentimes this can cause us to lower our guard and not stop and think. Something needs to be done now. Can have us move forward very quickly and not think about what the implications might be. In this case, a classic problem that we've seen, change this wire transfer to a new account or your payment will be late. Many companies have fallen victim to this recently where maybe they have an electronic transfer that's set up to a company and a hacker scammer interrupts that cycle and says, hey, for this month's payment, can you actually send it to this address instead? We'll talk about how to interrupt this one, but that urgency and interrupting that cycle there for hackers and scammers can be a huge moneymaker for a lot of them. There's also familiarity. Can you send me five $100 Google gift cards for the holiday party today? If this came from your boss, you might say, sure, that makes sense. I'll go ahead and take care of that. But one of the hardest ways is it actually your boss? Did this email come from your boss or did it come from a different address? There's also curiosity. How would you like to learn how to save money on your mortgage? Maybe you're curious about how to save your money. For some people, this might not work, but for others on the right day, it might be something that could get somebody to click. There's also greed. I'm prepared to transfer $1 million to your account, right? The classic Nigerian prince scam. If you're looking for money and that might be something that's enticing for you, that greed could be a huge motivating factor. And finally, helpfulness. Hey, I need your help to pull all of our W-2s so I can send them to our accountant. If you work in HR or finance and you get this email from your CEO, you might just do it without even thinking so that you can kind of move on with your day or just because you want to be helpful. All of these motivators, though, are kind of the underlying, again, real core ingredients that make up social engineering. Most of these scams that can occur through phishing and vishing and smishing and even impersonating leverage these to be able to try to make them work. You might remember earlier when I talked about impersonating that wearing a yellow vest and carrying a clipboard can get you into most places. Well, that's probably that authority piece, right? You look like someone who knows where they should be and you know what you're doing. Other things too, like phishing, saying maybe you need to act now to update your benefits or your account information. That urgency is there. So all of these scams always just kind of leverage these different motivating factors in different ways. Sometimes they combine them and pull them together in different ways. But these are the core motivators that you really need to keep in the back of your mind. So when we look at some of the top phishing email subjects, especially as they relate to some social media accounts, these would be like emails that come out and you might get an alert in your inbox that says, hey, a friend has tagged you in a photo on Facebook. Or maybe there's a login alert on a new device for Chrome. Or please add me to your LinkedIn network. All of those might come through and you might say, hey, I need to act on that. But a quiz time problem for you here is really what are the motivators for each of these? When we look at all these pieces, which of these are being used for each of these email subjects? So a login alert for Chrome, well, if it's a login alert on a new device, that might be something where you go, oh, hold up. I'm curious, one, about who is logging in on a new device. And two, I want to make sure my account hasn't been stolen. Maybe someone's going to steal my email and all my information. So I need to work quickly. That's that urgency. Or maybe someone sent you a direct message on Twitter, and maybe it's somebody you know, and they say, hey, can you help me with this thing? Maybe it's helpfulness, and you want to check out what's going on. Or you appeared in new searches this week. Maybe that's kind of that general consensus. You just want to check in and say, hey, I want to be part of all of this, see who's searching for me. Or maybe it's familiarity. It's somebody who's looking at your LinkedIn profile that you know, or at least you think you know. So all of these can be leveraged in different ways to kind of align with each of these subjects. Really, at the end of the day, it's more of an art form than anything. How do we use these motivators to come up with new and innovative ways to help trick somebody? The biggest thing, though, when we talk about phishing is there's a couple flavors of it, and I've alluded to these a little bit earlier as well. The first is links. These would be links that take you to a malicious web page when clicked. So the email comes in, and there's somewhere on the page that says, "Hey, click here to check this alert," or "Click here to log in and do something." The second is attachments. These would be attachments that execute malware when they're opened. There's a big scheme going on right now where Excel workbooks are being sent out and they actually have macros on them that are malicious. That means that hackers and scammers are using them to try to launch malware on your computer. So when you open up that Excel workbook, it says, do you want to enable macros on that pop-up? And most people ignore it and just click, yeah, sure, whatever. I want to make sure this workbook works the way it's intended. And that causes all kinds of problems. Finally, there's also form fills. And this is similar to the links where maybe that link takes you to a web page, but rather than that web page launching some sort of malware right there, it maybe mimics a real one. So it looks like a Facebook login or a Microsoft 365 login page. And so when you go to enter your username and password, you type it in. And once you click log in, nothing ends up happening. And you go, well, I don't know what's going on with this. And you close it out. What you didn't know is that when you did that, all of your information got sent off to the hackers and scammers and recorded in a database somewhere. So now they have your information and they're going to use it to go to other places, maybe to log into your Microsoft 365 account. Or they may go and try that username and password on other sites like Facebook or Twitter or your bank accounts to see if they can get in. If you've reused passwords, then that's a huge problem for you. So let's take an example here and take a real look at some real world phishing examples. Up first, here is a Amazon receipt. When we take a look at this, it's got an Amazon order, and it really looks like Amazon's actual emails. For those of you who shop on Amazon, you may recognize it. For a lot of hackers and scammers, they can pull the information straight from actual emails and make their phishing emails look exactly like the real ones, including fonts, colors, and even the layout. In this case, there's a couple areas that should give away that this is a phishing email. Up first, you can see that the domain name, that's the part that comes after the @ symbol, says secureonlinebenefits.com. That makes no sense for Amazon, right? That has nothing to do with them at all. If it was Amazon shipping or Amazon shipping receipt or something.com, maybe that's a little bit closer. But again, it's not exactly Amazon.com. So it should give you a little bit of pause. In this case, this should be a huge red flag and should stop you in your tracks. The second thing, too, like I just talked about, is it's very on brand for Amazon. That's because it pulls all of their language and colors and fonts and everything else. But one of the best ways to think about this, too, is if you receive this email at work, something you could stop and ask yourself is one, did I order something on Amazon? And two, did I use my company email to order it? If you didn't, and you have your Amazon account set up to go to your home email address, then that should be a huge red flag as well. That would let you know that's a phishing email, and you should definitely not click on it. The third one, though, we talked about earlier with some of these motivators, is this idea of urgency. And especially one of the biggest motivators is the idea of money. And in this case, if you maybe received this receipt for a large purchase of $237, that might cause you to have that sense of urgency to say, whoa, what has happened? And how do I stop this order from arriving? Because I didn't order this and I don't want this to come in, especially given how expensive it is. So rather than trying to investigate and think it through, you might just click on that big yellow button right there that says viewer manage order. You click on that button and boom, just like we talked about, that might either take you to a page to log in where they could steal your information or launch malware right away. That's a huge problem. And so the best way, and we always recommend this for any of these alert style notifications. So any of the ones that maybe earlier we talked about with social media, you have a new connection or a new message or any receipts from companies, is go directly to that website, log in there. So go directly, in this case, to Amazon.com and log in using your username and password and see if there is an order that you recently placed. If there's no order there, then you know that this is a phishing email. That's a great way to interrupt that cycle of abuse from hackers and scammers. Here's another good one that comes in probably a little bit more along the lines of companies. In this case, it's a HR related email about open enrollment. Given that open enrollment has started or is about to start for many companies, hackers and scammers know this. And this email gets very popular at this time of year, sending out information saying, hey, you need to log in for open enrollment. Think about all the information you have to provide as part of your insurance coverage. Your name, your address, previous health concerns, that protected health information, your social security number, address, all kinds of information, and really some of the best stuff that hackers and scammers need to conduct identity theft. Well, one of the big things up here is up top, like we talked about, that urgency, action required. You might go, oh, I need to do this real quick and take care of it so I can get this done before open enrollment. But stop, breathe, and consider, what is the email really asking? Up next, your name might be in there. In this case, hi, Alex, and your company name wants to remind you to choose your health insurance plans. Well, when we take a look at that, all of that information generally is publicly available. In fact, most of your emails probably have your name in the email. So that makes it easy for hackers and scammers to pull your name. And a quick Google search or even a quick perusal through LinkedIn might let a hacker or scammer know what company you work at. So even though this information might seem personalized, in that case, it might not actually really be the benefits company emailing you, but it's just that the hacker or scammers pulled that information from publicly available resources. Finally, many companies, including yours, probably use third parties to manage their benefits. So in this case, if we took a quick search, we see that it says log into your Zenefits account. Well, if you did a quick Google on Zenefits, you'd find out that's not a real company. And you could also go through and really go back and check or even call and contact your HR representatives and say, hey, did we move to a new company called Zenefits? Or is there a new email coming out about this that I should know about? If you haven't heard of Zenefits before, or there's been notification from your HR representatives, or if HR says, no, we don't use them, that's a huge red flag for you. So how do we stop social engineering? Well, one of the big things we talked about is, do I recognize the sender? Slow down and ask yourself, is the text after the @ symbol domain, does it seem off? So for example, if the email purports to come from Apple, and rather than having it say Apple or at apple.com, maybe instead it says at apple.com.ru. That's a little bit different. In fact, that's the ending for Russia. And so that might be something that says to you, hey, maybe I shouldn't be clicking and acting on this. In the case of smishing, what phone number did the message come from? Is it one you recognize or you maybe have received information from before, like from your bank? If it's a new number and it says, hey, this is from your bank, but you've received text messages from your bank before, that should make you stop and pause. Why is this coming through from a new number? One of the big ones that really affects people from a phishing perspective is the idea of business email compromise, which means a hacker or scammer actually gets into somebody's email account and sends emails from it pretending to be them. One of the best ways that hackers and scammers are effective in this case is they actually pull up old conversations. So you may have been conversing with a colleague back and forth for quite some time, and then suddenly the conversation gets brought back up. And you were talking maybe about a purchase order that you were doing, and suddenly that colleague emails you back and says, "Hey, I've got a new purchase order here. Can you check it out?" And there's an attachment on there. And it's been weeks since you took care of this. It's all done and closed up, and you get this message. That should be a great point where you say, "Hey, something is off." And so that's where you should say, well, what should I do about this? The best way, and we'll talk about this in a minute as well, but it's just to pick up the phone, call that person and say, hey, did you send me a new PO? What's going on with this? That can make a huge, huge difference. The same deal can be said actually for your family members. If you receive a weird email from someone in your family, pick up the phone and call them. Hey, mom, did you send me a weird email? Or, is this something that's different? Are these actual pictures you sent me? That can relieve a huge amount of problems. Don't email them back, though, and say, hey, is this a real email? Because the person you're emailing is the hacker or scammer. That's not going to be helpful because, of course, they reply and say, oh, yeah, it's definitely me. You should believe me and do this thing that I need you to do. So find another way to contact them. Maybe when we start to get back into the office, you can just stand up and walk over to that person's desk. Hey, did you ask for this? Is something going on? Find out. Also, if we look a little bit further here, am I expecting this email or text message? Something to think about is, does this person normally email or text you? Or is it a little out of the blue and maybe unorthodox? Is the message about a service maybe you don't currently use? So is somebody emailing you to pay your Verizon bill, but you're an AT&T customer? Something that we talked about earlier is maybe the message comes in and it's about a service you use, but it's to a different location. So maybe that Amazon alert comes to your work email address, but you know that you signed up for your Amazon account with your home email address. One of the best ways here as well is it acting or is the message asking you to act on something often quickly? Slow down, give that message a read through and try to understand what's going on. Anytime something says action needed or urgent or you need to do this right now, that should be a huge red flag. And just take an extra second to read through that email before you click or do anything on there. Like we talked about earlier, navigate directly to the website and check for any alerts. And like we just talked about, just pick up the phone and call the person, text them, try to find another way to contact them and find out if something is going on and if it's actually a real message. If somebody ever calls you and asks about an email or message, thank them for calling you. Say, I appreciate you calling me. No, I did not send you that. Definitely make sure to ignore it or delete it or send it to spam. Again, like we talked about, does the message contain any information that may be publicly available? So things like we talked about, your name and your email are generally out there on the internet already. But then think about all the data breaches that have occurred in recent years. Those data breaches have included all kinds of information, including your name, your email, and even passwords you may have used previously. There are some forms of phishing now going around where the hacker scammer will put a password in the email that you may have used or currently use. But those have actually just been stolen as a result of other data breaches. And so while the email might purport to have just stolen the information from you, that's not always the case. Something to watch out, though, for is if you ever get an email from a hacker scammer and it has a password in there saying, I've stolen your password from you, and you are currently using that password, that means that that password has been stolen and it's out on the dark web somewhere. If you're still using that password on any of your accounts online, you need to go change that password right away. One big thing, though, that we should note here with phishing and smishing, back in the day, we used to talk about all kinds of misspellings or broken English, maybe, that were in emails. That's really not a problem anymore. Many hackers and scammers can leverage things like Google Translate to make sure that their email works and speaks in a language that actually flows naturally. They can also just directly pull information, like that Amazon example, straight from actual Amazon emails, which makes them more credible. So one of the big things up next here for vishing and impersonating is the IRS calling you? We've got Matt, the radar technician, over here. And so if you're wondering, is the IRS calling me? The short answer is the IRS will never call you. They only send letters via the mail. And this should be noted. The IRS has a lot of information on their website about that. So just something to keep an eye out for. One big thing to really think about here is when you're getting these calls or someone is coming in and maybe impersonating someone, are they demanding action now? Do they seem off in some form? Hey, I need to get in some space. Hey, I need you to update your mortgage information or you're going to fall into default. When you ask them questions, do they dodge those questions about who they are, kind of give nebulous answers about that? One best way to interrupt that cycle is ask them if you can call the company they represent back. So if they've called you, say, you know what, let me call you back. And so go online, find that company's website, and call them and call that customer service number that's available. Especially if it's a reputable company, something you know like Apple or Microsoft, you can call those numbers and say, hey, I just got a call from you guys. Is something going on? And find out if that's actually the case. If it's a smaller company you've never heard of, that website online could also be part of the scam. So something to keep an eye out on is that even though you say, yeah, let me go Google this company, and they say, yeah, our company name is XYZ LLC, and you go and find that website, it could be part of the scam as well. So it might be something you can't trust. And that makes it really hard to know how do you act or react to that. If you're in person, see who you can call to verify that this person has a need to know or a need to access. So maybe it's the company they represent. Maybe it's somebody at your company that they're asking to see, or say that that person authorized them to come to this location and do something. Find out how you can call and make sure that person actually needs to be there. The biggest thing at the end of the day, and most important thing, is if you see something, you need to say something. Let other people know. If you get a phishing email, it's very likely that somebody else at your company might get phishing emails. Or if you experience a vishing scheme or somebody calling you pretending to be somebody else, call other people in your family and let them know about your experience. It could be a hot dinner discussion just to talk about it. But there's been times where I get calls from family members where they've had something funky happen or had a weird experience, and they call and ask me and say, hey, does this seem off? Oftentimes, looking at those motivators that we talked about, you can usually identify what the scheme is trying to do and let your family member know that, hey, that's definitely something you shouldn't be acting on. So let's talk. Ultimately, got a couple questions in here, and I'm going to pull them up right now as well. That first question was actually about, I think it's for phone calls, but I think this probably applies to phishing as well. And it's a question of, should you just pick up the phone for spam calls and just leave them on silent, or maybe respond and say some choice words to them or some fruity language? Ultimately, we recommend that you do not pick up the phone for spam calls. Just let it ring through, or silence the call and let it be. The same goes for phishing emails. Don't reply back to them and say, stop contacting me. I know this is a scam. One of the big things for a lot of these hackers and scammers is that they get big lists of emails and phone numbers, and they take all that information. And like we talked about, it's a numbers game. They take all that information and they try to call out or email out to all kinds of people. And they don't always know if they're actual numbers or emails. But the second you reply, whether you pick up the phone or text back or answer that phone call or email message, they now know that not only is that information real, but you're actually somebody who's willing to engage with them. That sets you up again to that big point that we talked about at the top of this, which is on the right day with the right lure, anybody can fall for a social engineering scam. And so knowing that, they can, of course, start to craft something up. They may start to do more research on you and figure out how they can try to trick you. That sets you up in a bad space. So at the end of the day, make sure you ignore those calls. It's not worth trying to get back at that person, because ultimately you staying silent and not responding is going to be one of the best ways to stop that from happening. That was our main question, it looked like, for today, and we are almost out of time. I want to make sure to really thank you for joining us today. Obviously, here being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it's always our goal to cover these concepts and make them approachable. And so ultimately, I would love if you take this information and share it out. Share it with your colleagues and your family members to help keep them safe online. This is one of the best areas that we can help reduce the risk for everybody. Especially as we get closer to the holidays, all kinds of phishing scams and social engineering scams really do pick up. And so we want to make sure to keep you and your family members safe as we head into the end of the year. Heading into next month, make sure to head to our website there at www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. We're going to have Corey Neske back on, and he's going to be talking about innovation in cybersecurity and ultimately compromising to innovate. For a lot of folks in the IT industry, they feel like they have to compromise on the things that they want to do in the name of cybersecurity, but that's just not the case. There's ways to balance risk within our industry and still let innovation happen. So make sure you sign up for that talk, again, at www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Until next time, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to act and not react. Thank you.